Eleanor St. James stood on the balcony of her penthouse, overlooking a glittering city that she had, in many ways, helped shape. The air buzzed with the hum of conversation and laughter as the elite of society gathered in her honor, celebrating a decade of marriage that many envied. She clinked her champagne flute against her husband Daniel's, their smiles for the cameras flawlessly aligned. Yet, even as the evening unfolded with precision, Eleanor felt the first fissures in her perfect world. From the moment she entered the ballroom, dressed in an emerald gown that brought out the fire in her sharp green eyes, Eleanor had felt a vague unease. It wasn't the guests, who flitted about praising her achievements as the CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, nor was it her husband Daniel, who stood at her side with his signature charm, the architect behind some of the city's most iconic buildings. No, it was something less tangible, something woven into the night's fabric, hidden beneath the surface, like a hairline crack in tempered glass. 5. Her younger sister Lila was the first to catch her attention. Perpetually the life of the party, Lila moved through the crowd with a magnetism that Eleanor both admired and found slightly exhausting. But tonight her energy seemed focused. Her laughter rang out, too loud and too close as she stood with Daniel, their heads inclined toward one another. Eleanor felt a flash of irritation, a sensation that quickly turned to guilt. It was absurd to feel anything but gratitude for this evening, for the man who had stood by her for a decade. Yet, she couldn't shake the niggling feeling that something was amiss. Then there was Adrian. Standing near the bar, nursing a whiskey, her business partner of 15 years seemed uncharacteristically withdrawn. Adrian, the steady hand at her side during countless crises, was watching her with a look she couldn't quite place. It wasn't admiration or pride. It was something darker, more cautious. "Trust is a precious thing, Eleanor," he'd said earlier, his voice low. "Why don't people—" She had laughed it off, attributing his mood to the stress of an upcoming product launch. Still, his words lingered. Eileen sat on the grass. "I was angry." The climax of the evening came when the string quartet began to play a waltz and Daniel extended his hand. "To 10 more years," he murmured, guiding her onto the dance floor. As they moved, Eleanor forced herself to focus on the moment, the swell of the music, the warmth of his hand at her waist. But even then, her gaze was drawn to the edges of the room, to Lila leaning too close to a waiter's whispered words, to Adrian slipping out the side door with a quick glance over his shoulder. By the time the party wound down, Eleanor's unease had coalesced into something sharper. She stood in the center of her bedroom later that night, the dress she had worn lying draped over a chair like a discarded piece of armor. Daniel was already asleep, his even breaths a metronome against the ticking of the wall clock. Eleanor stared at her reflection in the mirror, a vision of poise and success. So yet behind the flawless image a question churned. Had she built her empire on a foundation that was beginning to crumble? For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a flicker of fear. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from facing down competitors or shareholders. This was personal, primal, the kind of fear that whispered in the dark, suggesting that the life she had constructed, brick by painstaking brick, might not be as indestructible as it seemed. Eleanor sat at the sleek marble table in her home office, the envelope in her hand crumpled slightly from her tightened grip. The anonymous letter had arrived that morning, a single sheet of paper folded without ceremony. Its message was brief, typed in cold black ink. "Your husband is sleeping with your sister, and Adrian is preparing a coup in the company. Check the accounts." She stared at the words, her heart pounding in a way that was foreign to her normally unshakable composure. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. Anonymous letters were rarely credible. Yet, as she read the words again, her mind drifted back to the party, to Daniel's conspiratorial whispers with Lila on the balcony, to Adrian's cryptic warnings. Could there be truth to this? Against her better judgment, she opened her laptop. It wasn't suspicion that drove her. It was something deeper. An ingrained sense of control. Eleanor had spent years building systems, uncovering flaws, and safeguarding the empire she and Adrian had forged. If there was even a chance this claim held weight, She needed to know. Logging into the company's financial system, she navigated with the ease of someone who had designed much of its architecture herself. For the first hour, nothing seemed amiss, but as she delved deeper, Eleanor began to notice discrepancies, accounts with unusual transaction patterns, transfers to companies she didn't recognize. A shell company with a generic name had received significant sums over the past 6 months. All authorized by Adrian. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard as a cold certainty settled in her chest. Later that evening, Eleanor wandered through the house in a daze. The living room was quiet except for the muffled sound of the television. Daniel sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. From where she stood in the hallway, Eleanor could see his profile, illuminated by the flickering screen. He looked so at ease, so completely unaware. She turned to leave, but a faint voice drew her back. She followed the sound to the balcony, where Lila and Daniel stood silhouetted against the night. Her sister's laugh was soft but carried a dangerous intimacy. Then Daniel's voice, low and sharp, pierced the quiet. "She has no idea, does she? She thinks she's so clever, so untouchable. But soon, everything will be in our hands." Eleanor stepped back, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they would hear it. For a moment, she considered confronting them right there, demanding answers. But the logical part of her mind, the part that had kept her at the top of a ruthless industry, prevailed. She couldn't afford to act without proof. The next morning, Eleanor reviewed Adrian's transactions more thoroughly. Every time she thought she had found the bottom, another layer of deceit appeared. Shell companies led to more shell companies, and the numbers all pointed to Adrian siphoning money from their operations. She uncovered a series of meetings Adrian had scheduled without her knowledge, all with competitors. By the end of the day, Eleanor's world felt irrevocably shifted. The people she trusted most, her husband, her sister, and her business partner, had woven a web of betrayal so intricate it left her breathless. But there was no time for grief or anger. If she wanted to protect herself and everything she had built, she needed a plan. Eleanor wasn't just a victim, she was a strategist, and now the game was hers to play. Eleanor St. James had never been one to act impulsively. In her world, rash decisions equaled disaster. Now, as she stared at the evidence of betrayal spreading across her desk, her mind shifted into a cold, calculated mode. Rage burned within her, but she pressed it down, channeling it into something more productive. A plan. The first step was containment. She needed to ensure that neither Adrian nor her husband realized she was onto them. It was tempting to confront Daniel after overhearing his balcony conversation with Lila, but she knew better. Confrontation without preparation was weakness, and Eleanor St. James was never weak. She spent the next week in quiet observation, every gesture and interaction carefully calculated to give the appearance of normalcy. She laughed at Daniel's jokes over dinner, indulged Lila's self-absorbed stories, and exchanged professional pleasantries with Adrian during their meetings. But beneath her polished exterior, Eleanor's mind raced. Hidden cameras became her first tool of war. She discreetly installed them throughout the house, targeting key locations like the balcony and living room, where Daniel and Lila often seemed to retreat for whispered conversations. Each night, after everyone else was asleep, she reviewed the footage, piecing together the extent of their relationship. What she discovered was devastating. Secretive touches, lingering glances, and the way Daniel's voice softened when he spoke to Lila. It wasn't just an affair, it was a partnership of betrayal. Simultaneously, Eleanor dug deeper into Adrian's financial dealings. The complexity of the scheme astounded her. He had created a labyrinth of shell companies, each obscuring the trail of stolen funds. Adrian wasn't just greedy. He was brilliant. But Eleanor was more brilliant. She began documenting everything, saving records and copies of transactions on a secure drive that only she could access. Her suspicions of a broader conspiracy solidified when she hacked into Adrian's correspondence, emails, meeting schedules, and private messages. What she uncovered made her blood run cold. A coordinated plan involving Daniel and Lila. The three of them had been in communication for months, mapping out a coup to strip Eleanor of her CEO title and divide her assets among themselves. "Hello, no fate shall not divide us apart," said Paul. Adrian's endgame was clear: oust Eleanor from her company, leaving him in sole control of the empire they had built together. Meanwhile, Daniel and Lila plotted to use Eleanor's divorce settlement to fund their new life. Yet Eleanor wasn't only gathering evidence, she was setting traps. She planted small but purposeful bits of misinformation into her conversations with Adrian, gauging how quickly they would resurface in his actions. A fabricated investor deal here, a mention of financial strain there, all breadcrumbs leading to dead ends that would later expose his duplicity. Notice what not. That was how she studied it. By the end of the month, Eleanor had constructed a web of her own. Every betrayal was now documented, every account traced, every lie exposed. She wasn't just preparing to defend herself, she was preparing to strike. The people who thought they could destroy her didn't realize they were walking into a battlefield she had already rigged to explode. Victory, Eleanor knew, wasn't about brute force, it was about precision, and when the time came, she would execute her plan with surgical perfection. The corporate gala was a spectacle of elegance and power, every detail meticulously planned by Adrian to cement his reputation as a leader in the tech world. The room glittered with opulence, crystal chandeliers, polished silverware, and the hum of conversations between industry titans. For Adrian, this was meant to be a crowning moment. For Eleanor, it was the stage for her reckoning. Eleanor entered the room in a blazing red gown, the color a deliberate choice. It wasn't just confidence, it was a warning, a signal to her enemies that she was no longer playing their game. Heads turned as she walked in, her sharp smile cutting through the air. Adrian approached her almost immediately, his mask of professional warmth firmly in place. "Eleanor, you look radiant," he said, offering his hand to guide her toward the crowd. She took it, her fingers brushing his, but her grip was firm, a silent warning. "Thank you, Adrian," she replied, her tone velvet smooth. "It's a night to remember, isn't it?" The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed ballet. Eleanor moved through the room, speaking with investors and board members, keeping up the illusion of harmony. But behind her calm demeanor, her plan was already in motion. Earlier that day, she had distributed copies of damning evidence, financial statements, recorded conversations, and incriminating emails, to select allies within the company's board. She didn't need to sway everyone, just enough to ensure Adrian's downfall. As the night wore on, Eleanor waited for the perfect moment to strike. Adrian, flush with the success of the evening, took to the stage to deliver his keynote speech. The room fell silent as he spoke, his voice ringing with authority. He painted a vision of the company's future, one of innovation and growth. The audience applauded, their admiration for him palpable. When Adrian concluded, Eleanor stepped forward, applause still echoing. She took the microphone, her movements slow and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady but carrying an edge that silenced the room. "I'd like to extend my gratitude to Adrian for organizing such a remarkable evening. But tonight, I'd also like to share some truths that affect not just me, but the very foundation of this company." The screens behind her lit up, displaying financial records and emails she had uncovered. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Adrian's web of deceit came into focus. "This is the man you've trusted," she said, her tone sharp now. "A man who has siphoned millions from this company, undermining the integrity we've built together." The next slide showed a video clip of Daniel and Lila in a heated conversation, their betrayal laid bare for all to see. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Adrian tried to interject, his voice rising in protest, but Eleanor raised her hand, silencing him. "The evidence has already been sent to the board and the authorities," she said. "Adrian, your reign ends tonight." Don't. By the time she left the stage, the room was in chaos. Adrian had been escorted out, his protests falling on deaf ears. Daniel and Lila stood frozen, their pale faces a portrait of ruin. Eleanor, calm and composed, sipped her champagne. The stage had been hers, and she had wielded it like a weapon. The game was over, or so she thought. Eleanor stood on the balcony of her penthouse, a glass of champagne in hand. Below her, the city stretched out, its lights twinkling like constellations. The chaos of the gala was behind her now, but its aftermath loomed large. She had exposed her enemies, laid bare their betrayals, and reclaimed her life and legacy in one swift, discreet miracle. For all her power and control, the scars of betrayal lingered. Daniel had been the first to crumble. The prenuptial agreement Eleanor had insisted on a decade ago proved to be her greatest shield. He had tried to salvage some semblance of dignity during their confrontation, pleading for another chance, claiming Leela had manipulated him. But Eleanor had seen the footage, heard the venom in his voice as he called her stupid and mocked her trust. There was no forgiveness to be had. With the prenup in place, Daniel left with nothing but the clothes on his back, a hollow shell of the man she once loved. Leela's fall was equally swift. Eleanor had ensured that her sister's betrayal reached every corner of their social circle. Invitations dried up, friendships dissolved, and Leela found herself ostracized. The humiliation was complete when Eleanor, in a rare moment of cold finality, banished her from the family. "You stopped being my sister the moment you conspired against me," Eleanor had said, her voice devoid of emotion. Adrian faced the harshest consequences. The board of directors moved quickly, filing criminal charges based on the evidence Eleanor had provided. His assets were frozen, and his once bright future was replaced with the grim reality of lawsuits and a ruined reputation. Eleanor had ensured that every trace of his involvement in the company was erased, his name becoming a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. But even in the wake of her victory, Eleanor felt the weight of what she had lost. The life she thought she had, perfect, unshakable, was gone. Every relationship she held dear had been poisoned by deceit. Yet, standing alone on her balcony, Eleanor realized that she hadn't emerged broken. She was bruised, yes, but she was still standing. The company, her true passion, became her anchor. In the weeks following the gala, Eleanor worked tirelessly to rebuild trust among her employees and the board. She introduced stricter oversight measures, ensuring that no one could repeat Adrian's schemes. In every meeting, she exuded the confidence and strength that had once defined her. Slowly, the pieces of her professional life began to fall back into place. One evening, as she reviewed the company's quarterly reports, a memory of Adrian's final words surfaced. "Do you think this is the end, Eleanor? This is just the beginning of the game." But Eleanor dismissed the thought, not out of arrogance, but out of resolve. If there were more battles to come, she would face them head-on, just as she had faced this one. The life she had rebuilt might not be the perfect facade it once was, but it was real, forged in the fires of betrayal and redemption. As she raised her glass to the city below, Eleanor whispered to herself, "Let the games begin." For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a conqueror.